September 12, 1683, 5:30 in the afternoon, the Ottoman army, a 300,000-strong horde that had rolled through Europe like a steamroller over asphalt, was falling apart before everyone's eyes. Conquerors accustomed to dictating terms to entire continents turned into a frightened herd, trampling each other in panic. The earth shook from the impact of 20,000 hooves. The Winged Hussars of King Jan Sobieski crashed into Ottoman positions with such force that the sound of collision carried for kilometers. Pikes skewered 2 or 3 soldiers at once, breaking with a crack. Grand Vizier Mustafa Pasha, still confident of his triumph that morning, grabbed the Prophet's banner and fled in terror, abandoning his army, treasures, and honor. Vienna was saved. Western civilization received a chance to survive. But how did it come to this? Summer of 1683. Imagine a map of Europe, not a school diagram with neat borders, but a living, pulsating reality where every line is drawn in blood. Vienna, the brilliant capital of the Habsburgs and heart of the Holy Roman Empire, froze awaiting catastrophe. From the east advanced not just an army. This was an avalanche of 300,000 men flowing through the Danube valleys, sweeping away everything in its path. White Ottoman tents covered the land to the horizon. If Vienna falls today, European history might end tomorrow. Rome will become a mosque, Paris will become a province of the Sultan. Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Gothic cathedrals, universities, all will be erased, rewritten, forgotten. But this was only the beginning of the drama that shook the entire world. Late 17th century Europe represented not a united front against external threats, but quarreling rulers. France under Louis XIV, the Sun King, dreamed of humiliating the Austrian Habsburgs. Protestants hated Catholics, Catholics despised Protestants. The continent was weak, fragmented, and blind to the approaching storm. Meanwhile, in the east, a new crescent moon was rising. The Ottoman Empire, the superpower of its time. Istanbul was the center of the universe, the richest city on the planet, from where Sultan Mehmed IV ruled lands from Baghdad to Budapest. Empires, like sharks, must move to live. They need new blood, new land, new glory. This glory awaited them in Vienna. The city was called the Golden Apple, an Ottoman obsession for a century and a half. In 1529, Suleiman the Magnificent had already stood beneath these walls but retreated due to rain and cold. This retreat remained an unhealed wound on the sublime Porte's pride. Vienna stuck like a splinter that had to be pulled out at any cost. A man appeared in Istanbul who decided the time had come. Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier. Eyes cold as the winter Bosphorus, ambitions exceeding the empire's very size. He was clever, cruel, and incredibly wealthy. He had 1,500 concubines and 700 black eunuchs just to guard his harem. But wealth wasn't enough. He needed eternity. He convinces the Sultan to break the peace treaty with Austria. "I will bring you the keys to Rome," the vizier promises, and the Sultan gives him an army. What an army! But greatness often blinds the mind more than any desert. In spring of 1683, a force marched out from the gates of Edirne, the likes of which Europe hadn't seen since the Hunnic invasions. Leading were the Janissaries, professional warriors kidnapped as children from Christian families and raised in fanatical devotion to Islam. Behind them followed the Sipahi, heavy cavalry in gleaming armor. Then came countless contingents from Anatolia, Egypt, Syria, and of course the Tatars of the Crimean Khan, light cavalry, locusts devouring everything alive. 300,000 men, 300 cannons, tens of thousands of camels, buffalo, and mules. This army's baggage train stretched for hundreds of kilometers. This wasn't war, this was a migration of peoples. Vienna meanwhile slept, lulled by diplomacy and its own complacency. When the first reports of the Turkish advance reached the court, Emperor Leopold didn't believe them. "They're just trying to frighten us," advisors said. But when Tatar raiders began burning villages in Lower Austria, panic covered the city in an icy wave. On July 7th, Emperor Leopold committed an act that forever stained his reputation. He fled. Together with the entire court, ministers, and 60,000 of the wealthiest citizens, he left Vienna, heading west to Linz. Behind him trailed carriages with gold, tapestries, and wine. Common people remained. They were abandoned to their fate. Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg was appointed city commandant. 45 years old, a stern, taciturn military man, veteran of many campaigns. He looked at the emperor's emptying palace, then at the horizon where smoke columns were already rising from burning villages, and understood there were almost no chances. He had 11,000 regular soldiers and 5,000 militia, students, shopkeepers, guildmasters, against 300,000 Turks. Vienna's walls were strong but old, moats overgrown with grass, fortifications needing repair. Starhemberg began frantic preparations. Within 3 days, all Vienna's suburbs were burned to deny the enemy shelter. Beautiful villas, gardens, parks, all given to flames. The city became a bare island amid scorched earth. On July 14th, the Ottomans arrived, and this was a sight that froze blood in veins. First came a rumble like an earthquake. Then the horizon turned white with countless tents. Thousands, tens of thousands of pavilions rose around the city in a single day. The Turks built their camp, larger and richer than Vienna itself, with bathhouses, mosques, fountains, and menageries. At the center, on high ground, Kara Mustafa's tent was erected, enormous, green, embroidered with gold, the size of a small palace. The vizier emerged, looked at St. Stephen's Cathedral spire, and smiled. The siege began, but Kara Mustafa made a fatal mistake. He could have taken Vienna by storm in the first days, overwhelming the garrison by numbers. Casualties would have been enormous, but the city would have fallen. However, the vizier was greedy. He knew, by the laws of war, a city taken by storm is given over to soldiers for plunder, but a city that surrenders pays ransom to the commander. Kara Mustafa wanted Vienna intact. He wanted its gold for himself. Therefore, he ordered not to storm, but to dig. Ottoman engineers were the world's best masters of underground warfare. They began digging zigzagging trenches, approaching the walls meter by meter. The earth around Vienna became a labyrinth. But the most terrible things happened underground. Turkish miners dug deep tunnels under bastions, laid barrels of black powder in them, and detonated them. Vienna trembled from daily explosions. Walls collapsed, sank into moats. Defenders rushed to breaches, closing them with their bodies, sacks of wool, furniture, everything at hand. But this was only the beginning of the real nightmare. Hell began inside the city. Imagine July heat. Tens of thousands of people locked in the city. No sewage system, insufficient water, wells drying up or becoming contaminated. Soon, dysentery began, bloody flux as they called it then. It cut people down faster than bullets. The unfortunate passed away right in the streets, and their bodies were simply thrown into pits or left lying covered with rags. By August, no food remained. First they ate horses, then donkeys, then dogs and cats. Finally, they began catching rats. The price for one rat reached the cost of a gold ring. People boiled leather from old suitcases and saddles, trying to deceive their stomachs. Starhemberg was everywhere. He slept 2 hours without removing his boots. He was wounded in the shoulder but continued walking the walls, leaning on a cane. He knew morale was the only thing holding the walls. He ordered anyone who spoke of surrender executed. He personally hanged 2 looters in the main square. But the most terrible was the underground war. The Austrians understood Turkish tactics and began digging their own counter-tunnels. Complete darkness, stale, stuffy air, a narrow passage where you could only crawl. You hear the enemy's pickaxe striking somewhere nearby, the sound approaching, and suddenly the earth wall collapses and you find yourself face to face with a Turkish miner. Knives, shovels, even teeth come into play. Screaming is useless. No one will hear you beneath the earth. The victor plants the mine. The loser remains underground forever. By early September, Vienna resembled a skeleton. Walls remained as ruins. The garrison melted away. Of 11,000 soldiers, fewer than 4,000 remained in ranks. Officers fainted from exhaustion while giving orders. Meanwhile, Kara Mustafa in his luxurious tent drank sherbet and wrote letters to the Sultan. Vienna is an overripe fruit. A little more, and it will fall into my hands by itself. But he didn't know that storm clouds were already gathering behind his back. Emperor Leopold, though he had fled, didn't sit idle. His diplomats rushed throughout Europe, begging for help. But Europe remained silent. France gloated, German princes haggled. The only hope lay with Poland. King Jan III Sobieski, legendary warrior, victor over Turks at the Battle of Khotin. A man of enormous height, enormous strength, and equally enormous appetite for life. Turks called him the Lion of Lekistan and feared his name like fire. Sobieski didn't love the Habsburgs. Austrians always treated Poles with arrogance. But Sobieski was a wise king and understood geopolitics. If Vienna falls, he told his nobles, we'll be next. Better to fight the Turk on the Danube than on the Vistula. He assembled an army, 25,000 Poles, the world's finest cavalry. But this wasn't enough. He needed allies. And then a miracle occurred. Under pressure from the Pope in Rome, German principalities united. Bavaria, Saxony, Franconia sent their regiments. The relief army assembled at Tallinn, up the Danube. 70,000 men total. Different languages, different faiths, old grievances. but they were united by one goal: not to let the crescent rise over the center of Europe. Sobieski took overall command. "We march not for the emperor, but for God and Christendom," he declared. On September 4th, a critical moment in Vienna, the Turks exploded a huge section of wall at the Berg Bastion. A breach 10 meters wide formed. Janissaries launched an attack. Austrians met them with grape shot and boiling oil. The battle lasted 3 straight hours. They repelled the attack, but at what cost? Starhemberg wrote a final letter to the emperor. His courier, disguised as a Turk, made his way through the enemy camp at night. The letter contained just a few lines. "Your Majesty, there is no more time. If you don't come now, there will be nowhere to come." On September 8th, the feast of the Nativity of the Virgin Mary, Sobieski ferried his army across the Danube. Ahead lay the Vienna woods, a mountain range covered with dense, impenetrable forest. Kara Mustafa was certain the army couldn't pass there. He didn't post a single guard at the passes. This was his second fatal mistake. The Allies accomplished the impossible. In 3 days, they dragged cannons by hand up steep slopes, cut paths through forests. Horses broke legs, men collapsed from exhaustion, but moved forward. They knew every hour might cost Vienna. Evening of September 11th. Sobieski's scouts climbed Mount Kahlenberg, the highest point above Vienna. They parted branches and froze. Below, as if in the palm of their hand, lay the city ringed in fire, and around it, an endless sea of Turkish tents. Sobieski ordered enormous bonfires lit on the summit. This was the signal. Below, in the dying city, Starhemberg saw fires on the mountain. He wept, for the first time in 2 months. Kara Mustafa also saw the fires. They reported to him, "Infidels on the mountain." But again he displayed criminal complacency. "It's a small detachment," he waved dismissively. "Don't bother me with trifles." He was so confident in his superiority that he didn't even cancel the assault on the city scheduled for morning. He left his best Janissaries in the trenches, while deploying only part of his forces against Sobieski's army, hoping to easily crush them. Sunday, September 12th, 1683, the day that changed the world forever. Dawn. The Turkish army awoke and saw a terrifying sight. The entire Kahlenberg Ridge was covered with a forest of pikes and banners. The Christian army began its descent. Sobieski's plan was simple. The left flank, Austrians and Germans under command of Charles of Lorraine, would attack along the Danube, engaging the Turks in battle. The center would press the enemy, while the right flank, Polish forces, would make a wide flanking movement through the forest to strike at the most vulnerable point. Morning began with an artillery duel. Then infantry entered the fray. Charles of Lorraine slowly, methodically drove Turks from vineyards and villages at the mountain's foot. Janissaries fought desperately. Every house became a fortress. Heat intensified. Smoke from black powder obscured the sun. By midday, the Allies advanced forward, but slowly. Kara Mustafa, finally recognizing the scale of the threat, began redeploying troops. He grew nervous, threw his cavalry into battle, but on difficult terrain cut by ravines, the cavalry bogged down. Sobieski observed from the hill. He waited. He knew. The Turks were stretching their lines. He waited for a mistake. Around 4 o'clock, the battle subsided. Both sides were exhausted, the heat unbearable. Kara Mustafa decided to regroup and deliver a counterstrike. He weakened his right flank, thinking that there in the dense forest, the Poles had gotten stuck. And at that moment, the forest came alive. Emerging from the thicket came they, the Winged Hussars, Poland's pride, the cavalry elite. Imagine a rider in full plate armor. Behind him, a wooden frame studded with eagle feathers. This wasn't for decoration. At full gallop, these wings vibrated, creating an eerie, low-frequency hum that drove enemy horses mad. In their hands, pikes 5 to 6 meters long, longer than any infantry pike of the time. 20,000 horsemen. 4 hussar banners in front. Behind them, armored Cossacks, riders, dragoons. Sobieski, fat, old, suffering from gout, transformed in this moment. He mounted his horse, drew his saber. "In the name of the Lord," he shouted. The earth began to tremble. At first it resembled distant thunder, then an earthquake. 20,000 hooves beat in unison. An avalanche of steel, feathers, and fury cascaded down the hill. This was pure physics, mass multiplied by velocity. Nothing living could stop this strike. The hussars smashed into Turkish ranks, the sound of impact heard for kilometers. Long pikes skewered 2 or 3 Turks at a time, breaking with a crack. Riders drew sabers and conchers, long swords for piercing armor. The Ottoman army simply burst apart. Formation disintegrated instantly. Those who seconds ago were world conquerors became a terrified mob. They threw down weapons, cannons, banners, and fled. The Hussars carved a corridor straight to Kara Mustafa's green tent. The vizier saw it, saw his end. He grabbed the prophet's banner, the Sanjaki sheriff, leaped onto a horse and galloped away, abandoning his army, his treasures, his honor. At 5:30 in the afternoon, it was all over. The East's greatest army ceased to exist as a fighting force. Only dust and fleeing backs remained. Sobieski stopped his horse at the entrance to the vizier's tent. He wearily wiped his saber on the horse's mane and spoke a phrase paraphrasing Julius Caesar: "We came, we saw, God conquered." The night after the battle was strange. Deathly silence reigned in the Turkish camp, interrupted only by the groans of the wounded. Victors feared entering deep into the camp, wary of traps. But morning revealed a scene worthy of tales from the 1001 Nights. The Ottomans abandoned everything: mountains of gold, precious stones, silks, weapons inlaid with turquoise. Tents were full of carpets, cages with parrots, lions, ostriches. Soldiers who had starved yesterday now ate from silver dishes. In the camp, they found sacks of strange green beans. Soldiers thought this was camel fodder and wanted to burn them. But one man, Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki, a nobleman and spy who knew Turkish customs, stopped them. "This is coffee," he said. He took the sacks for himself and several weeks later opened Vienna's first coffee house. He added milk and honey to the bitter Turkish drink. Thus, Viennese coffee was born. Legend says that bakers baked crescent-shaped rolls to honor the victory, croissants. But there was a dark side. In the camp, they found thousands of bodies of Christian prisoners. Before fleeing, Turks had slit their throats so as not to leave them for the enemy. Vienna, opening its gates, wept with both happiness and horror simultaneously. On September 13th, Sobieski entered the city. It was a triumph. People kissed his horse's stirrups, touched his cloak as if it were a holy relic. Emperor Leopold arrived later. The meeting of the two monarchs was cold. Leopold, envying the Poles' glory, didn't even remove his hat in greeting. Sobieski, seeing this, merely smiled into his mustache. He knew who the real king was here. And what of Kara Mustafa? He reached Belgrade and tried to blame his commanders, executing many of them. But in Istanbul, they already knew everything. Sultan Mehmed IV was furious. On December 25th, Christmas, what irony of fate, the chief of the palace guard and executioners entered Kara Mustafa's tent. The vizier didn't resist. He spread out a prayer rug, prayed, then stood. The executioner placed a silk cord around his neck. Several seconds of wheezing, and the man who dreamed of ruling the world became just a corpse. They cut off his head, placed it in a velvet sack, and sent it to the Sultan. Why is this battle so important? Because September 12th, 1683 is the day when history's pendulum swung the other way. Until this moment, Islam advanced while the Christian world defended. After Vienna, everything changed forever. The Ottoman Empire received a blow from which it never recovered. It began slowly but surely rolling back. The Great Turkish War began, as a result of which Austria reconquered Hungary and Transylvania. Russia began its movement toward the Black Sea. The map of Europe was redrawn. If Vienna had fallen, it's hard even to imagine the consequences. Perhaps all of Central Europe would have become Muslim. Perhaps there would have been no Austrian Empire, no rise of Prussia. History would have taken a completely different course. But Vienna held. And this is a lesson that even when a situation seems hopeless, when mathematics, logic, and superior force are against you, one must not surrender. Vienna was saved not only thanks to cannons and hussars. It was saved thanks to will. The will of Starhemberg, who didn't sleep for months. The will of Sobieski, who risked his throne for an idea. The will of common people who ate rats but didn't open the gates. Walls can be destroyed, will is much harder to break.